right. Well, you know what? We're going to go ahead and get started. Our chair. Yep. Thank you so much, Alex, for being our technical support, and just everyone. Alex will be available to us for support and in the Q&A. At the moment, we believe our chair has some technical difficulty, so Preeti and I will be jumping in and just starting to talk a little bit about EDIA and then begin to answer a couple of the questions. So I'll just open with that equity, diversity, inclusion, and access. And that's the order that we use the terms in here. And I'm based in Los Angeles in the United States. As a way of really understanding that when we look at inclusion, diversity, and accessibility and access, we want to talk about equity first. So we want equality, equity to be the foundational principle. And then we move into diversity, not just of people, of how we look, because we know race is a construct. So that's a colonized perspective, but actually how we open to diverse perspectives, diverse lived experiences, diverse lifestyles, diverse geography, and in the whole spectrum of how we look at work. And then inclusion, again, that's everything from including everyone to the concept of including all voices. That's also including contributions and acknowledging those contributions. And then for access and accessibility, we're talking not just about physical accessibility or people who have different physical expectations or needs, but we're also talking about what we may be dealing with today, which is access, as in being able to get online, being able to have use viable internet, being able to have the ability to, the socioeconomic ability to attend and participate in things. And so when we look at it in a workplace, we want to flatten those hierarchies and create a space where they, what we in Omnigi call organizational communities, as opposed to these hierarchical structures and a lot of the issues that we deal with in our social society that are harmful. So I'll pass to Preeti to give your perspective and the initials that you use, but that's what we use in Omnigi. We use the EDIA.
Hi everyone, Preeti Wadhwa. I'm actually pretty much in the same time zone as Vernita. I'm close to LA. We loosely call ourselves LA. I live in the Orange County, which is a suburb in Southern California, and we use the acronym EDI, but I can see how EDI will extend to EDIA because access issues are related with the issues of EDI. And as Vernita said, equity is the foundational principle of diversity, because unless you start looking at the issues of equity and equality and the systemic institutionalized inequality across the world, actually, not just the United States, although the issues may be slightly different and their history may be slightly different. And then, of course, the element of diversity. But then diversity goes hand in hand with inclusion, because unless you are able to leverage that diversity that you have in your organization, and until you are able to give a voice to those diverse people. I mean, some organizations would reduce diversity to affirmative action, and you say, oh, we have all of these groups represented, but you are there marginalized in your organizations. They don't have opportunities to go up or have a voice, and in terms of decision making, then that in that situation, diversity alone is not enough. And then, like Vernita said, access, or what's in some situations would be accessibility issues. Generally, when it's talked about, even when you do a Google search, accessibility would be technology or learner-related accessibility, in terms of whether somebody is visual or hearing disability or some of the other form or age-related disability, where how do you make the material, the reading or the learning material, accessible to those people? But definitely, especially in COVID, it's really brought to forefront that accessibility or access is the social access, the economic access issue as well. Because I mean, many of us, almost all of us went to work from home, schooling from home. But then we were talking about, do kids have access to internet if they want to get into Zoom classrooms? Do they have access to the technological devices that they need to be able to get into their Zoom classrooms, or if they have the device, is it dated where they don't have the right resolution to turn their cameras on, or they're struggling with a microphone or a speaker not working. It's very easy for us to have those expectations. Or there could be other access issues with work-life, balance issues at home. When you're all working from home, then there were people with, there were mothers who just had babies. There were people who were caregivers. There were people who had to do multiple different things. So a lot of different challenges when it comes to access. So like Vernita said, it's definitely a much broader issue. And COVID has really brought that to forefront, that it really is. And, so that's something we are hoping that we'll be able to talk. And both of us are hoping it's going to be a very, very interactive, very informal sort of a platform where we welcome all comments. Don't feel like you have to hold on to your comments or questions until the very end, because this is a very charged topic. We all feel very emotionally about these topics. So I personally don't want you to be holding on to what you want to say, chat, whatever you feel comfortable. Just have that voice. We're talking about inclusion, so we want to make sure you all have that voice in this session.
And I would add to Preeti that I think oftentimes we don't have spaces where we can interact and where we can talk. And I think it's important for us to create as many of those spaces as possible, because to me, and at least in our lab, we found that that's the missing piece, is getting the communication and then the comprehension and understanding of the things that we communicate. So with that, I also should just introduce myself, that I'm Dr. Vernita Perkins. I'm with Omnigi Research. And what we are is an open entity. We do not define ourselves. We created a space for a lot of open discussions to look at how health matters in our lives. And surprise, we deal with COVID. So we study applied meaningful living, which means we look at everything. And work is one of our areas where we know that most people spend an extraordinary amount of time at work. And I know in the US, we have an obsession with spending way too many hours at work. There's an expectation. So because of that, we want to focus and study that. Our goal is to help people find ways to really be whole people and live full lives. At any rate, we also have the Cognition and Behavior Lab that we started in March, where we're actually taking all these ideas in and really studying them.
Here we are, since we're introducing ourselves. Vernita.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Since I think we just kind of went backward, but there we are.
But it's probably good because more people have joined, so now they got to they got the introduction, right?
Yes. So I'm Dr. Preeti Wadhwa. I'm an associate professor of management and leadership at Cal Poly Pomona. It's one of the university in the California state system here, and I primarily, in terms of my research and teaching interest and my service interest as well, I'm primarily interested in transformations, whether it's transformations in people or whether it's transformations in organizations. And alongside my other interests, which is very related, is diversity and inclusion, because that's got a lot to do with transforming organizations and transforming lives, and also business ethics as a big issue. I've been involved in multiple student success initiatives on my campus, which is something that excites me a lot, particularly our first year experience initiative, where our students are transitioning from being a high school student to a first year college student, and more so when they're first generation college students belonging to certain underrepresented minorities. And a lot of times there's an overlap. They would be first generation college student, they would be belonging to an underrepresented minority group, and they would be belonging to, in terms of economically disadvantaged group as well. So those usually get to be very overlapping. And so those challenges, and given what their challenges and opportunities are, giving them voices, giving them opportunities on campus to develop that sense of belonging and find a supportive community are some of the initiatives I get involved in. Because I'm involved in the Student Success Initiative, we do a lot of faculty development workshops. I'm a part of that group on campus that does biannual faculty development workshop during summer and winter. In fact, our very last one was on the topic of diversity and inclusion. We literally had our ethnic study group come in, join hands with us, partner with us, and really calling in and inviting faculty to engage in this conscious engagement and self-reflective sort of an exercise as to what can we do, how can we make our classrooms inclusive where all the students feel like they have a voice in the classroom. So that's sort of.
And I was going to add, the accentuated management and my degrees are in organizational leadership and organizational management as well. I think we are aware that a lot of this is about the opportunity to be decision makers, right? So oftentimes in our society, we saw it in the US over the past 2 years, that the people that we entrusted to be our leaders and to make decisions were not making the best decisions because, again, they weren't using equity and diversity and inclusion and access in their choices. And they were not using that lens, as you said, Dr. Preeti, to understand how important that is. And so we see a lot of people struggling with understanding. We also see a lot of people giving away their ability to make decisions. And so is our chair going to make it in, or?
I think Jamila is in. I just sent her the link.
So Jamila, I think she joined us. She's among the viewers, but she has to send me a request to be put on screen. There should be a button on the top.
Oh, that button that says ask and share.
Exactly. And
there's a big green button, Jamila, if you can hear us. There's a big green button that says ask and share. And it opens up a screen then that shows your camera and your microphone and lets you make that selection. And then you hit ask and share, and then that lets you in.
And then I can put you on screen and accept the request. Or maybe you could write also in the chat if you can hear us.
So actually, like Alejandra said, you could also use the same thing that you did on the top right. Share your video and audio, which is what I struggled with the first 30 minutes, the beginning.
Okay, I don't really
I don't see that on my screen, but.
Do you see the request? Anybody?
I don't. Only you can see it. We won't be able to see it.
I would guess maybe. I'm looking down here. See it? Yeah, for mine it shows 0 requests in the queue.
Yeah, so for me too.
Also, too, I just clicked on that, the little gear button down on the bottom, and that gear button opens up that panel that allowed me to get my microphone and stuff and get in here.
Maybe I can put her. I can. Yeah.
Interesting.
Normally there's the button popping up with the person that I can just click on a plus and then she's added, but she should also be like the.
And I think it may also be affiliated with making your camera live as well, because that may be because I know when things started happening when I made my camera live.
Yeah, I think the testing definitely helped with that. So. Yeah.
And then also, the last thing is being on Chrome, or what's the other browser, Firefox?
I think,
Firefox. I think Google Chrome is the browser because so I think making sure. So one question, can Jamila hear us?
I think she can.
Jamila, are you able to hear us?
If you're able to hear us, tell us in the chat.
Let me ask her that if she can't hear us, then she won't be able to tell us because she can hear us.
Yeah,
Let me ask her on WhatsApp and see what she says.
Okay.
Anybody has any questions, comments, anything that you want to share? Something that
I was going to say, that would be good if you have questions so far from what we shared, because we can certainly start answering those questions while we work through this to make the best use of the time. And I know one of the questions I would have for everyone to maybe ask a question off of is the initials, like you said, Dr. Preeti, you do EDI. And then in my research in my world, we are doing EDIA. And I wonder if anybody, depending on where you are in the world or what your work experiences are, if anybody else is having something different than that, or a different understanding than we've shared of what we understand about equity, diversity, inclusion, and access.
Mm-hmm. So what acronyms, what initials do you guys use in your part of the world, whether it's EDI, EDIA? What does access mean in your part of the world? Other people who would like to share, feel free to use whatever platform.
And it's interesting too, because like you said, we are not that far apart, living in the greater Los Angeles area. And yet where you are versus where I am, there is a difference. In Orange County versus Los Angeles County, there's a difference in how people approach those based on the demographics, right?
Yeah, I guess, and also I guess these terms are so evolving. So I would not be surprised that even our university is very, it gets trickled down from the Cal State system. So depending upon when somebody introduced them and you understood the meaning of why that was added, and then to the point where that actually gets officially adopted, there's always this time lag. So it would simply be just a matter of that.
And I know in many management spaces and in corporate business spaces, they only want to use the D and the I because they're terrified of, I guess, the legal liabilities of trying to do equity. And they really don't want, they feel like we put wheelchair ramps out there, that's access. So I think that they don't understand. So they focus on diversity and inclusion, and they keep it to a very homogeneous approach of, which again, defeats the purpose of diversity. And they consider it just, of our same group that look like us, act like us, and live like us. We'll do diversity within that, which is it's so much broader. And then inclusion, they see that as just sort of including, the relative people around in the workplace. But what we're saying is inclusion of thoughts, ideas, and also that include diversity inclusion, even if they just want to use the D&I, includes actually taking in thoughts that you don't agree with. And that's the beauty of what we're doing in Omnigi research and in the lab, is we are allowing all the voices, even voices that we don't necessarily have to agree with in our personal life. You want that in your professional life. And the other thing is, it's not as a driver for competition and for wealth acquisition, which is, again, what in the US, many corporations look at diversity inclusion as getting more voices, more ideas so that they can make more money. And we're going, no. It's to create a more welcoming and more inclusive and a more innovative workspace. Like you said, Dr. Preeti, that then expands on that and creates, all companies, their goal is to get us to purchase or buy or participate. And so in order to do that, you have to understand humans. And if all you know how to do is sell your products or services and you're just trying to make money, you're not doing this. So equity, diversity, inclusion, access goes beyond just, the racial issues that we saw in the United States and that reflected around the world, and trying to make an equitable world, but really saying, if you're out there in business, you should be supporting the humans and the living beings that you work with, not just trying to make money, because that money concept alone and that hierarchical concept is a colonizer concept.
Absolutely. And I see Emily in chat mention a very important point. So she's talking about in the context of designers, along with the EDI piece, which is the diversity, equity, and inclusion. They, in their context, they have justice and accessibility. So not just A, but also the J part, which is very relevant there. Thank you for sharing that, Emily. Yes, you make a very important point there. So, you can't have DEI until you have the justice and accessibility, because you can't have accessibility until there's fairness and justice. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, and justice, thank you again, Emily, too, because justice has, that's really about, making things right? That the African concept of Ubuntu, right? And the Hawaiian concept of Ho'oponopono, which is about realigning and making right and restoring and putting things back to the best way. And then like you said, Dr. Preeti, taking it to another level too, because we know all of what we know right now is going to evolve. So that's another reason why I'm always frustrated when we do recordings of sessions. I understand that people want to hear it, but we have to know that probably by the time you hear it, things will have evolved, right?
And I think recording to me, yeah. And recording to me for these kind of sessions takes sometimes, not all the time, takes away the psychological safety of people to be able to have the voice. You know, if some of my students were always told that they were being recorded, they would not share what they share when I'm not recording the sessions. So, you know, the psychological safety piece is so critical in situations where people want to feel that, you know, nobody's judging them for what they're saying. And if you want to give voice, you also want to provide resources where people truly are able to have the voice. Yay! We have Jamila.
You're here, Jamila. Yes.
Jamila, you're here.
Non, c'est bon, ça me dérange pas ça. C'est surtout le son, mais pas de son. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Can you hear us? Can you hear us?
Non, ça.
We can hear you for sure.
You know, it's so symbolic since you're talking about the topic that we're talking about.
Oh, you can. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes,
can
I cannot hear you.
Oh,
I can see you, but I cannot hear you.
Okay, so I think
I am
again,
in progress.
yeah,
At
there's
least
a
I can
green
see you.
Okay.
And hopefully I'll be able to hear you. So I'm trying to connect from different devices.
okay. Jamila, I thought that you were putting on some sort of an experiential activity for the session. Because, you know, if you think about it, this whole situation, which has happened for all of us during the COVID and Zoom time, how you feel when you are not up on the screen, you're not visible, you are not heard. And that's exactly what we're talking about when we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, that you want people to have the voice and feel like they're being heard. And, you know, it's think about the experiment. I mean, I look at it, there was one time it happened with me and I was so frustrated that people couldn't hear me and they couldn't see me on the screen. And it took me back to that, you know, like, how does it feel when you are really that person where everybody can see you and yet chooses not to see you and hear you? So in that sense, it could be very profound. Like Zoom really helps us experience those situations where...
C'est parce qu'en fait, t'essaies de te... Faut faire login.
We can hear you, Jamila.
That's so fascinating.
Yeah, Jamila, we can hear you, but we can't see you. Maybe, okay. Do you see the buttons on the bottom for sharing your mic and the video? Okay, maybe we should go.
Yeah, her mic should be fine because we can hear her. But it's her something to do with her sound at her end because she can't hear us.
Right.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Hear us.
We can hear you.
Oh, finally. I'm so sorry. I had a technical issue.
We still can't
device, and then I used another one, and another one. I really did my best to join you.
We still can't see you, though. We can hear you, but we can't see you.
Great.
Are you able to hear us?
Right. You may have too many devices on now because we're getting feedback.
Echoing, yeah.
Okay, so I see that your mic is off. It shows it off on your screen. I still can't see your camera, but I can see your mic is turned off. So
building off what Emily said, so I think Emily also noticed what Zin said.
Right, exactly. I was going to say, let's acknowledge.
Ideas. I really like that. So it's not exactly.
I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I noticed a lot of people also have gone to using idea because it's a good catchphrase, right? So instead of the EDIA, it's the same initials just reordered. so that it comes out idea. I like ideas for the social justice because it's a good point to include that. So thank you, Zen, also for letting us know that as well. And I think it's great that people have been thinking about this, that they've been considering. I hope we come to at least a universal understanding of expressing all of those points, the inclusion and the diversity and the access and equity and then social justice. Super important, all of them.
Hello?
Hi, Jamila.
Hi. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
The good part is you can hear us now, it seems like.
And if you can hear us, now the only thing we can't see you. So that's.
Yes. So sorry. And I'm just afraid if I put the camera on because I tried before and then it blocked everything.
Okay.
I'm so sorry.
We'll work with what we have. You can hear us, we can hear you. That's a good part.
I can hear you, yeah. I apologize for the audience and everyone.
Yes, so to get you up to speed, we've Dr. Preeti and I have both introduced ourselves, and we just have been talking about the initials EDIA, IDA, IDEAS, all the different versions of these as well, of what equity and diversity and inclusion and access mean, and then Dr. Preeti and I talked about in our context.
So we are ready to move on to your next question. If I know we were to start.
We haven't started the first question.
We more or less ended up talking about access and how it means in different communities and what does it mean and all. So I guess in the interest of time, since we're already at close to 12:30, that first question we ended up taking up your role just to get the session started. But we're so glad that you're back here to take the good charge and get us going.
Just one question. Do you talk about accessibility? Access? Yes, what does it mean in the US?
Yeah, that's what you see in the chat as well.
Okay,
so
and
there's a question for you in the chat.
Okay, I will check question afterwards. And did you mention that accessibility has a totally different meaning? That in some countries, in France, for instance, it refers to disability.
Yeah, we kind of ended up talking about those different meanings, the limited meaning of accessibility and how COVID in many ways has changed it and how it could mean so many different things. And Dr. Perkins talked about the EDIA in the context of our organization. And I don't want to speak for her, so I let her speak.
Well, right. And we talked about the difference between access and accessibility. And then we did not talk about beyond that because I'm from the US, so I have some experience internationally, but I don't want to speak from that perspective. And so I think that would be a good point for you to cover that part, because that was the only part that we left open. And then we began to ask the audience for their feedback.
Okay, so it's okay. So I suggest to move on to the second question. And it is the following. The murder of George Floyd, set in a global pandemic, has pushed to a global stage to severe racial unrest in the United States. And also it has sparked outrage worldwide. And it has placed intense focus on the lack of EDIA in every facet of life. So what is the result of EDIA initiatives and how have they impacted work and workplace globally? For instance, we have seen that in France there are a lot of protests, and the same in other countries, in Africa as well. So I would like to know, what's your experience about that?
Do you want to start, Dr. Perkins? That's a very heavy question for all of us, I guess, in the room. And
well, right, and it's interesting because I know George Floyd's murder. We've been talking about this a lot in our discussion group called Our Story Education, and then also we've been talking about it a lot in the lab about how his murder was so pivotal, and we were talking about because it was basically live, right? So it was live being, people were viewing it live, and the helplessness we all felt, even the people who were in the area, the helplessness that they felt, right? So what we So what we understand is that it was sort of an awakening. So this work has been done for, you know, for literally several hundred years in the U.S. This you know, anti-racism and this understanding of, again, we don't like to use the term minorities, and I'm going to stress that today because minorities continues to feed into the hierarchy, the caste concept, the concept of less than. People that are called minorities are often not population-wise less than, but they are treated less than. So we like to say marginalized. But this work has been done for a long time, and we understand that it's based on a concept of race and a concept of other labels that are constructs that were created. There's no substantive information behind them. And so now, yes, we call people male and female and then non-binary, and we have all these labels about race and these different, and age and where you're located from, or what religious affiliation is. But really, those are all constructs. Those are things that are made up, and they were made up by this colonized ideology as a tool to cause harm. So we want to be aware of that. And that's kind of the foundation of all the work we're doing right now. So as Dr. Preeti said, we're going to evolve that, right? So eventually, you know, we expect to move through that, but that's part of it. So when we look at that, we see that there is a difference in how people see that around the world, and depending on the origin stories, right? So depending on where in the world you come from, what those intersections are, right? Whether they're economic, whether they're regional, because in some places in the world, regional matters more. In the US, race matters more and money matters more. So it's money first, socioeconomic status, and then race. But in other parts of the world, those issues are not relevant. And so, and then it also depends in what cultures you admire. Like in the US, there's always been an admiration of British society, and you know, and sort of an awe, and that has impacted how we treat each other in society as well. So part of it is looking at that, and I think that's where our foundation first starts, because now we understand if we can dissect the colonized ideologies behind things, we get a clearer space to then start trying to build something new. And then I'll pass to Dr. Preeti.
And Debbie, did you see any progress since last year regarding other minorities except African Americans? Because it seems that there is a spotlight on African American minorities. I'm just wondering, what about other minorities?
Well, again, we don't say minorities, and African American,
other groups, diversity,
right? African American gets lumped together now. So again, like with other groups, Asian groups especially, there's so many different Asian groups, but everybody gets called Asian, everybody gets called Black. But I think that the reason why it's different in the U.S. is because of, you know, Native American groups and Black groups, because of the idea of stealing land and erasure, and the concept of exploitation through kidnapping and excessive labor. Those two groups are getting the most attention because there's a level of dehumanization that is absolutely unconscionable, right? And I think part of the colonizer ideology is to keep the races fighting against each other. And slowly all the racial groups are starting to realize that race isn't a real thing. We were just labeled that. And it's a colonizer tool to keep us infighting. So we are highly encouraging everybody to treat people as human, and to look at the world from that perspective, and to really do what's best for all of us, right? And not have the chosen group, or this group special, this group deserves more. And I want to clarify, Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter too. So when you think of that name, put a comma and a TOO on it, because they were saying Black Lives Matter also, not only, right? And so that's a clarification. And I think because there's so much racial anger and hatred and so much unhealed trauma in the United States, everyone was holding to their anger and their passion and their caste position, their hierarchical position, and they weren't forgetting that we're supposed to be a country that accepts everyone and values everyone. And I said in the beginning of this session, we need to all be clear on this planet. We cannot do this alone. We learned that in COVID. You cannot survive alone. We needed everybody. And we need to be clear going forward. And we need to start dropping these racial distinctions, because basically it's all colonizer ideology. We didn't choose that. Nobody is going to call themselves Black and then encourage themselves to be taken into slavery. That's absurd, right? But that's what it was about. It was about just being able to separate the groups so that they could decide what they wanted to do with this group. If you were dark skin and dark textured hair, you were going to be a slave for life. If you were Native American, so you had straight hair and that whatever markers they decided, then you were going to have your land stolen and you were going to be pushed as far away off to the side as possible, right? Erasure, genocide, right? And then so forth with each group, right? And so you see Asian groups being allowed to be included, but again, exploited labor as well. And any immigrants were invited in, but they were exploited as well, right? And so we have to understand that colonization is a very complex process. It was intended that way. And so we're breaking it down in the lab right now and looking and getting specifics on that and figuring out how to do, all the methodology and all of that. But that would be my answer, that other groups are having challenges, where they sit on the hierarchy. We need to be flattening that hierarchy.
Okay, thank you. Well, what do you think, Preeti? Really, your opinion is really important because you are based in America, but you also know the Indian context. So it would be very interesting to share your opinion about how it has evolved in the US and ideally in India as well.
So I will thank you, Dr. Perkins, thank you, Jamila, and thank you, Dr. Perkins, for sharing. And I couldn't agree more with you. I've had, in informal discussions with some very well-intentioned friends where the argument would be, why can't it be all lives matter? And the whole idea of either having the races fight, the marginalized groups fight against each other, or just dilute the movement by making it all lives matter. And so my point was exactly what you were just saying, that most lives have always mattered in the United States. So we don't really have to fight for their lives. It's the lives that we want to fight about are of George Floyd or Breonna Taylor or Ahmaud Arbery. Those are the lives that matter. So why would we talk about everyone? We would, let's say there's food on the table, a group is starving, the other group of people have had their food, they're happy, they don't want food. Why would we keep insisting that everybody should have food when the others are not hungry? And there's this group that's starving. So we need to focus on one group at a time and bring their cause to the forefront so the issue doesn't get diluted. So that too is pivotal there. Like, it's not just Black lives only matter, but Black lives matter too. So it shouldn't be that they have never mattered, but they need to matter. There's a lot of echoing. I'm sorry. I don't know.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but Jamila, could you use headphones or mute yourself while others speak? Because we got a lot of feedback of the sound going on.
Okay, I'll do that.
Yeah, thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you. So that's definitely a big. Yeah. So I guess I'm echoing a lot. I don't know if you guys hear me, but I'm hearing myself and I'm not able to speak. But no, that piece has really been a big deal for me in terms of that it can't just be Black lives only, it's Black lives matter too. And if you think about it, I'm personally not from the United States, but as an outsider who's been in the US for about 20 years, and I have watched the movements and events happening. To me, it's like, really, and you always said segregation was over. And so we had MLK, we had Rodney King, and here we are with George Floyd. So what's happening? Like, that's and that's something I always talk about with my students as well when I say that what's legal is not always ethical, because technically segregation is illegal. Does it not happen? Discrimination is illegal. Does it not happen? Back then, segregation was legal. Was it ethical? Absolutely not. So it's a very complicated issue, and I'm just kind of, the blessing in disguise is what we call the citizen journalism, where people, you know, back during Rodney King time, there was this person who was testing his camcorder, you know, which is, just happened to be lucky that that was happening. You know, how many people get to be testing their camcorder and get to record an event that's happening on the streets? Thankfully, now we all have cell phones, and citizens get to take a very active role in capturing these moments, because if those recordings are not there, justice in most of these cases would not be served. If you don't have dash cameras, justice in most of these cases would not be served. So in many cases, you know, citizen-based journalism, as they're called, has been extremely, extremely helpful. I mean, we have the Starbucks incident where during President Obama's regime, when we had these people who were waiting for a prospective client, and they wanted to use their restroom, and guess what? Cops were called on them. How many times has it happened to all of us? So, or a white person, or even a brown person for that matter. I mean, my husband and I, during this summer, given COVID and given work from home, we were able to have a lot of different conversations. And as a brown male who has shared, who's experienced, and as a brown person myself, we've experienced our share of discrimination and biases. But he said that, oh my God, I feel like I have the brown privilege, because being a black male is on the street is very different from being me. So if my husband could say it, to me, that's a pivotal moment that we have to talk about Black Lives Matter too, because he's like, I don't always have to worry about being killed on the street like that, you know, just because you, I mean, and then there are people who would argue about, oh, but they were not the best citizens. How many best citizens engaged in using a fake $20 bill and got killed for that? Most of those people who did that ended up talking about that as a story in their parties aftermath, not get killed for that. So I don't understand that there's a justice system that would take its course when people are not engaging in the lawful behavior. That doesn't mean that you have to treat them any differently and rob them of their dignity and their right to their lives. I mean, we've all seen those videos.
And can I just chime in also
Absolutely.
too, to say, Dr. Preeti, that we have to admit that from what the evidence that we heard, it was a fake $20 bill. As scientists, we need to see the facts. So I think that there's a lot of that. And so, and if you look at Ida B. Wells' work about the lynching in the early part of last century, there was so much blame about men, black men, threatening white women or saying something to them or trying to create that space. And in actuality, what we're now looking at as we look deeper and as we find the truth, because now a lot of people didn't understand that the United States was founded on the theft of land and on the kidnapping and abuse and exploitation of one group for labor. And the only reason why we're finding out the only reason why they chose dark-skinned, textured-haired people is because they believed that they could work harder and survive better. And so to be chosen just because the color of your skin, which is something you can't control, and to have your entire group of people for over 5-6 centuries be exploited and be used as like a chair or an object for eternity. Like there was no escape from slavery. So I think that once we understand that that's the founding of the United States and how that impacted other parts of the world, then you get a better understanding of George Floyd's situation, because it really doesn't matter, because we have a lot of white people in this country who commit heinous crimes right in front of everyone. And they don't, I mean, forget a fake $20 bill or a real $20 bill. They're doing really atrocious things. We have serial killers and all of that, and they're allowed to continue. So again, we have to put things in perspective. And we also have to look, I noticed that Zin in the chat also said, we need to look at it from the 360, right? From all different lived experiences, and ask ourselves, what does this look like from this angle, that angle, before we start trying to make judgments and trying to figure out solutions, right? So we always have to keep opening up to new information, which is part of the inclusion, right? Of listening to all the different voices and putting things in perspective. But the bottom line for us, all lives are important. That's living, that's trees, plants, animals, humans, all of it. And until the world really truly understands that, we're going to continue to be in this quagmire of confusion because we can't understand that life is valuable.
Thank you. Thank you for saying that. And I can see Zen saying that his experience is that helping people understand that there are different lived realities, different contexts has helped. You know, Zen, I think that's a great point. So I was talking to, again, one of my very well-intentioned friends from down south who's kind of gone through and seen the changes down south in Alabama. And I remember this person saying, I don't think there's any discrimination going on. I mean, I have a white friend of mine and a black friend of mine, and they're married. I mean, interracial marriages are taking place. And I'm like, to me, I'm like, just because you see a couple of interracial couples, that is your, that's your example to, you know, yeah. And even if you see more, I mean, that's not to say that there is no discrimination going on and there are no biases at play. And then again, and you know, so I had to explain a lot of different things. This person from mine had gone to, I can't remember which state down south during COVID, and she's like, oh, she had a lovely time. And I'm like, and she was asking me to go, and I'm like, I can promise you that I would not have the same lovely time that you had down there because of how I look. She was talking about those very informal interactions with people, you know, and I'm like, I can promise you that won't be mine. I'm not being prejudiced. I'm not being biased. I can promise you, based on my lived experience in a lot of other similar places and interactions, that yes, maybe I'll be able to break through in one or two encounters, but in most situations, my experience will not be the same as yours. So yes, those lived realities, lived experiences, and understanding people's context is really the key to understanding their experiences and how they may experience the same person very differently depending upon who they are and how they look, you know, and that's really important to remember.
And, you know, I'm also going to add, Dr. Preeti, that it's the unknown. So imagine, like you said, any of the groups that are marginalized. And again, I'm trying to really avoid the word minority and minoritizing because it's a lessening, it's trying to devalue. So any of the groups that are marginalized, it's the unknown, right? So think about it. It's when you get up and you get in your car and you want to go to the grocery store and to not come home and to be dead because of the way you look. That's what we're talking about, that unknown quantity. Yes, if you're committing a crime, then likely there's going to be some response, right? And again, certain people don't get a response when they commit crimes. But the general expectation is that if you're doing something you're not supposed to be doing or harming, that you're going to receive from our policing agencies worldwide some sort of consequence. But what we're talking about is just the idea of being a person who's in a wheelchair and having people around you laugh if you're trying to get up on a sidewalk or deliberately put you in a situation where your mobility is even further challenged. Or for people to assume that, like we were saying today, like any technical issues you have with the internet or whatever, that's because there's something wrong with you as a person, as opposed to we're all dealing with all different kinds of technology and all different kinds of issues. And even I live in Los Angeles, but I live in an area that's very poor internet. And we always laugh about it because there's an assumption around the world that everybody in Los Angeles is a movie star and has this, you know, heightened life. And that is not true. The same, but to be able to be frightened, to be afraid to just go to the store and get, you know, a basket of tomatoes, or be afraid to speak up in your workplace because you're fearful that not only will you get fired or will you get some violence, but that you could actually be harmed. To know that you can't ask for a raise or promotion, to know that you don't even know that you're excluded from meetings where you can have value or where you can have the inside understanding of what's really going on. And then you're told that you're not keeping up with your work or you're not able to contribute. And you're like, because I'm operating here in my job with half the information. So that's why it all matters. And it matters that everyone should be able to walk into their workplaces, whether it's a farm field or whether it's a corporate office or whether it's a bakery or whatever, and not have to have this weight of everything that they are being a deficit, being something that's bad, being something that doesn't serve them. And also to be dehumanized or devalued in that. So, and to me, that's what George Floyd represented, that awareness. Yes, maybe you don't look like him and maybe you don't have his lived experience, but you should be able to have the empathy to understand that it could be you. And to think if it was a different world, if we were all born 100 years ago or 200 years ago, or maybe 200 years in the future, to know that it could be a totally different experience is not okay. Like you said with talking to the friend, that you could go to a place, they used to say to me like about people with dark skin and textured hair, again, not traveling. And it's like, right, because it wasn't a safe thing. So now all that information's coming out. We just need people to stop denying it. And if you have a question or you disbelieve it, then dig a little deeper. Look at the origin story, trust the information. Dig and find your own information. If you don't believe slavery existed, then go look and find out for yourself. If you believe that life is better because you see a couple of celebrities who are females, or celebrities who are non-binary, or celebrities who are people of color, and they're doing good, so therefore you assume everybody else is, why don't you ask? We know that there's poverty all around the world, while we see other people, living these heightened lives and trying to fly to the moon. And then you have people who don't even have a toilet, literally, to go to the bathroom in. It's not okay. And so until we accept that and then start acknowledging that, like everyone's saying in the chat, that everybody has different lived experiences, and we need to care and we need to do something about it. And work is the main place where we're at. So we need to acknowledge that not everybody has a good work condition. And since right now our colonized society says you have to work to make money to pay your bills and to survive, then we have to do something about it. We have to make work a place of meaningfulness and a place of, health and well-being. And we have to really take a second evaluation about money and greed and that whole concept, and the concept of ownership, right? So, because again, if we're not working for all of us, and doing the best to support us, and we can have some healthy competition in there. We have to look at what that looks like probably further down the road, but we really need to get on board with the fact that everyone matters and everyone has value. And like you said, Dr. Preeti, not one group less than another, right? And if one group is crying out more, then shouldn't that give you a signal that maybe something's going on over here? Why do you just assume
that's equity? That's equity. It's equality, right? Is not the same as equity.
Right. And they both matter. See, they both need to be in place.
Yeah,
so some people want to say equity, and I'm like, that's part of where our colonized problem started, because you want equity, which means you're going to twist the system. So we also have to listen to where people's agendas are, their intention, and where, you can have a conversation. Are people really selflessly trying to help solve these problems, or are they trying to reposition themselves for advantage?
Agenda there.
Right? The slow movement of equity. Right.
Thank you so much. And Jamila, do you want me to go back to the Indian context that you were asking? We can't hear you. We still can't, sorry. Yeah, we definitely need to progress. Absolutely. Yes. Yes. No, I didn't say any concrete initiative, but I know you wanted me to kind of bring in the Indian context, and in the context of diversity and these kind of, diversity, equity, and inclusion issues. So I could very quickly talk about that. I mean, in the Indian context, we are fairly homogenous in terms of a race, but there are a lot of other ways people get divided. Religion is a big one, but even when we are fairly homogenous, the obsession with the lighter skin is a big deal in India. I mean, we have so many fairness creams out there that people want to use to be able to lighten their skin. It's only off late that I've been hearing a lot of celebrities putting their foot down, saying they're now going to be endorsing them because it's just not the right thing to do. That what kind of message are they sending down the line by being a brand ambassador of lightness cream? So, and in terms of gender issues, and if you guys have heard about Indian, still a huge amount of marriages in India are sort of arranged, it's a different story that instead of somebody playing Cupid, you have the online platforms that have taken over, but many of the marriages are still very arranged. So if you look at those platforms and the way they would talk about their preference for the partner that they're looking for, it's almost always, you won't see a single one that says they don't want a fair partner. You know, in terms of women in particular, for the girl, fair is a big piece of the description of the attributes they're looking for in a partner. So that itself, you know, is very complicated. And so that's a big piece there in terms of the gender and the race issues being intertwined like that. Some of the other issues in India that to me are at the forefront of this DEI movement is the LGBTQ. I mean, India was very late in the game. Homosexuality was criminalized until 2018. It's only in 2018 that it became decriminalized. So that was a big deal. Transgenders is another big issue there. I mean, until 2014, they weren't even identified as a third gender, quote unquote. They just didn't exist. So that was another big issue. And in terms of access to both employment and education, they just didn't have that access. Even now, although on papers the access is there, it's still not, because of the social stigma attached to it, you still don't have that same access. And then you start talking about a vicious cycle. How do people get out of that cycle when they don't get to have that access from the very beginning, or when they have that limited access? There's so much stigma, there is so much taboo that they are not able to use that access, you know, despite the fact that on papers they have it. So that's really another big issue in the context of India. Religion is another one. And, you know, we've always in the past talked about unity in diversity, given India having so many religions. But to me, at this point, it's only a slogan. There's a lot of fundamentalism happening in India. And again, kind of going back to what Dr. Perkins was saying, that, you know, political parties have their own agendas in terms of what they're saying, what they're endorsing, what they're doing. And religion, unfortunately, all across the world, not just in India, gets to be used as a weapon to divide people and to kind of create divisions. I mean, it happened in the United States forever. In the last 4 years, more than not. I'm sorry, I'm trying to stay away in terms of my political affiliations, but it's very obviously there. It's not a matter of opinion. These are facts that are out there. So in India also, it's been extremely divisive in that sense of late. And so that's another big issue there. You know, how issues gets politicized. And I was reading more about the other one is the caste system. So just like race in the US, caste system has been abolished, right? But does it not exist at all? It absolutely does. And actually, it doesn't just exist in the Hindu community in India. It actually exists in so many different forms in all the different communities, whether it's Muslim or whatever. There is this system of some sort of a social hierarchy that very much is ingrained. And the untouchables, or the Dalits, that were the lowest in the caste system in that hierarchy, despite the fact that we have so much going on in terms of affirmative action, the ones who are really poor in the villages, they don't even know this is happening. They don't even have access to that information. They don't have access to education. They are still being used as sanitation workers. Those are the only job options for them, as cleaners, cleaning the drains, as human scavengers. I mean, manually cleaning the drains and all without any protective gears. And since they were in the healthcare setting as sanitation workers and all during COVID, these people, when they got back home, given that they were migrant workers and all, when they got back home, they were so stigmatized. I was reading where these workers were echoing in their family that the entire family has been stigmatized by, you know, calling them that they're bringing corona in the area. And so now they already had limited access to things they could do, the places they could go to get their grocery and food and milk. Now they have even more limited access because they weren't allowed to get out. So this woman was talking about how she lives in this dwelling next to a milk factory, and yet she doesn't have milk for her kids because she doesn't have access. So that's another issue there.
Thank you. There is an echo. Thank you, Preeti.
I think if we all turn our mics off, it'll work while Jamila's speaking.
Now? There is still an echo.
I think it's because you're logged in twice with 2 accounts now.
Yeah, but this one is unmuted.
Can you unmute that one? Or okay, maybe now. Okay.
Hello? I better write my question. That would be better.
So sorry, Jamila. I know it must be.
Yeah, now everybody's muted.
Jamila said she was going to write the question. And I was going to say, thank you, Dr. Preeti, for bringing up the untouchables, because I think that's the best explanation of a group of people who are never expected to do anything but exist at a subhuman level for their entire life, all their children, generation after generation. And that's slavery in the US. So when people have a difficult time, they need to look at other countries, other civilizations, other times in our civilization's history to see where these types of practices were actively done, and then understand what the intention was, and then you understand better what was being done here.
No, I totally agree with you. And when people talk about the system needs to be fixed, I'm like, no, the system was intentionally designed like that. It doesn't need to be fixed. You have to come up with a brand new system, because the system was designed to be working in a certain fashion. So it's not this thing that happened by accident. This was completely intentional design to keep people at their place, so to say. And even the equivalent of affirmative action that's happening in India, we like to, we always chose the words, I don't know if that's the right way to put it, but we call it the cream layer. So they were these, the group of people from the, what we call scheduled caste or scheduled tribes, the lower in the hierarchy, who were able to take the advantage of the affirmative action and move up, at least economically. They were the ones who were aware their kids and their kids and their kids, generations down the line, kept taking advantage of those situations. And that's what some people say when they say, oh, but yeah, in the name of diversity and affirmative action, some people get advantaged and it's not fair. But what they don't see is that minus the small group that has been continuously taking the advantage, because they've gotten over the imposter syndrome, they've gotten the opportunities, they have the access. Everybody else is still where they are and they shouldn't be here. That's why it's not as simple as kind of going back to what Zin was talking about, the binary. It shouldn't be as either have affirmative action or not have it at all. That's either of them is not going to, that's not the problem here. So, so that's, again, hopefully we are able to get to a point, although diversity to me is ongoing, it's evolving. You're never done with it. You have to continuously work towards it.
Well, and I think, we're looking in the lab at colonization. And so and it's such a huge pile to unpack that it's going to take a minute. But part of what we're seeing is we are figuring at this point that it goes back almost 10,000 years. So if you realize that this was building for centuries, the concept of control, domination, invalidation, dehumanization. And it's literally, as a scholar mentioned to me the other day, it's baked into everything. It's in our food, how we grow our food and how we deliver food. It's in how we do love and marriage and our interpersonal connections. It's in how we do our housing. It's in how we do our transportation. It's in how we deal with money. It's in every aspect of our life. It's so baked in that we all believe that it's the norm. And really, like what you're saying is, it's not a matter of trying to be more diverse or ending, affirmative action or keeping it or whatever. It's a matter of completely, and we're going to have to do it in a certain pattern. But what we've been coming up within the lab is to understand that we have to dismantle this whole thing, but we have to start building a bridge to the next space we can move to in order to dismantle this. So you don't demolish a building you're living in, right? You need to come up with some temporary housing or some type of something to transfer so that you could do that. But that's what we understand. But the first place we need to go to, and in our work, the first thing that we're looking at is self-awareness. And we feel if people don't understand themselves and how they exist in the world, and as many people were saying, the lived experiences, then they can't even begin. If you don't understand yourself and have self-reflection and self-interrogation, self-evaluation, and then you're not then able to then build some empathy for others, right? And start beginning to understand how other people exist and live. That means you have to talk to other humans and engage other humans unconditionally, without judgment or hatred or any of those things. Then we can start actually looking and understanding the world around us and the things that don't make sense. And I truly believe it's going to take every one of us, because as everyone's been saying today, I live in my little section of the world, in my little house, in my little life. Now I'm talking to you, I'm talking to Jamila, I'm talking to all the audience members today, and we're going, wow, we saw about social justice. So EDIA with social justice, with justice. That's because we had a conversation. Now, we don't just walk away today and go, okay, well, that's it. That's my job. We actually now start to think about that and go, wait a minute, how does that look? So you reevaluate your life. And I, suggest to the people that are my lab colleagues and in our groups and in our spaces in Omnigi, I suggest you do it every day. Because like you said, Dr. Preeti, things change every day. So now I'm going to take all this information from this session. I'm going to leave here today, and I'm going to start putting it back through the rest of my life and processing and saying, okay, so what steps can I make to make the world a place where we can all exist in peace? How can we be able to dismantle colonialism and the colonizer ideology, which is just egregiously harmful, and not create more harm, but start creating healing? And the steps that we're doing is to first look internally at ourselves individually, and then to look at the systems, right? Because people keep saying, well, it's not the individual, it's the system. And I'm like, who do you think makes the systems and upholds them? Individuals. So it's both. But in the United States, there's a tendency for this American exceptionalism, this idea that Americans do nothing wrong and that everybody else is to blame. And we have to change that. We also have to listen to what's happening around the rest of the world, because in some of the villages and towns and cities all around the world are answers. But most of the people who are coming up with answers that are usable are being ignored, because colonization in itself, as a pathology and as a system and as an individual way of being, its goal is to deny. It works like an evil virus, right? Its goal is to deny and to discredit and to make fun of things. So somebody comes up with a good idea and says, hey, you guys, if we try this, we can all get along better. And then they make fun of it and try to destroy it, because colonization wants the world to be a place of suffering and pain and domination and hierarchies. And, certain people always having to be the slaves or the servants or the lesser, right? So that's, to us, that's where we have to start, with looking at the systems that are in our world. And some of those systems, as you said, Dr. Preeti, so brilliantly, are tied to some of the institutions we love the most, like our religions, our politics, our family heritage. We love that, and we're team go all the way. And those are the very structures that upheld slavery, the Inquisition, the destruction of humans, the caste system in India, and the caste system around the rest of the world, the untouchables. That was all upheld by the very systems that are supposed to be like religious systems and other political systems and family systems that are supposed to be helping us. And if you want to talk about family systems, let's talk about monarchies, which are one of the most corrupt expressions of colonization. And that's a family, or at least they labeled themselves that. So the family needs to be evaluated. And this is the tough part, because it means we all have to have the courage to self-evaluate, to self-interrogate, and to look around and say, what am I upholding? What do I believe in? What am I backing? By the actions I'm doing, what am I supporting? And how is that harming others?
Thank you, Dr. Vernita. I think you made some great points, and thank you for bringing in the idea that it's almost like a norm. We just look at things and we're like, oh, that's the way it's supposed to be. And that actually just reminded me of, like I grew up in India initially. My teenage was also there, and I was very indifferent to looking at our health at home any differently than what I was trained to, I guess, unconsciously. So my mom really took care of our health, really gave them good food and everything. And they would come in the morning, leave in the evening. But there was something that I never questioned because I was a part of the culture. It was a part of our training, is that our health never actually sat up on the couch or the chair. She always sat on the floor. And this is a very typical thing in almost all Indian households, and actually many South Asian households. And there were always these set of utensils set aside for them, that they will only use those and you will not use the utensils that you use for your food. So my mom would always give the exact same food. Many households would give leftovers, but my mom was very big on, exactly what we're eating. She will make sure that they get it first, actually. But so to me, she was a really good, nurturing person who took care of things. So when I went back the first time after having been in the United States for a little while, it just caught my attention because I'm like, why can't she sit on the couch? Why does she have to eat in those utensils only? And why can't she be using what we are using, So then I started questioning the things that were a part of the norm, and I never questioned when I was in that system because I was very indifferent to it. So then I started asking my mom about it. And to my pleasant surprise, next time when I went back home, took her a few years, she was not doing any of that stuff. So the conversations, asking questions make a huge difference. She's always been extremely benevolent. I don't want to call kind of like a boss, very benevolent, and they've always been very happy. But this piece never bothered her, and it never bothered me while I was there. But when I saw kind of like a different paradigm, like Dr. Vernita is saying, that you have to have an alternative, I never thought things could be any different. But when I did, I'm like, well, this is a better way of interacting or treating your employees in the informal economy than the other one. Why were we doing it like that, right? So when you start questioning those assumptions that are almost a part of your norms, that's when change happens. And all of us need to question those assumptions that we have, based on our lived experiences. We need to be able to understand other people's lived experiences, like Zin was saying earlier as well. So that piece would be a good starting point for all of us to have those conversations, where we invite other people and have people who are different from us in terms of their opinions and have a voice. So we have a question in the chat by Jamila. Democratizing work involves rethinking how we work and the idea that we need to change the laws. What do you think can be done to democratize work and bring more of the equity, inclusion, diversity, and access? Do you want to take that first, Dr. Vernita?
Yeah, I'll be super quick because I'm looking at the time. I think the thing is really to reevaluate our society, because obviously, and I think the core for me would be to go back to the origins of work, and the modern colonized society that we live in. The origins of work were exploitation and slavery, right? So it was always about like you said, it was always about finding somebody else to do the work so that we could live better. And so you see in all across different countries that there was always supposed to be a serving class, so that if you were able to rise above that and not be in the serving class, you could live, and the serving class could work. And then the understanding that then if they were even paid, because slavery is the ideal one, right? That's the serving class that's permanent and never gets paid. So that's an easy thing. And you can also dump all of your problems and anger on these individuals. So that's where the disregard of the bodies. So that's what I would say, is to first look at those structures. Like you said, your mom was able to look at that and make change and be willing to make change and be able to sacrifice, because it's going to look different. Mm-hmm. That's what I would say is the first, my first thing is to be able to look at how the structure is and to flatten those hierarchies and ask yourself, if the tables were turned, would I want to be in the serving class and be treated that way? And most people would say no. And then I'm like, then why do we still have a serving class?
No, I think those are very valid points. I think I want to maybe end with more of an optimistic note. During the Black Lives Matter movement that happened last summer, despite all the negativity, despite people trying to kind of brush them off as violence, as riots, and not focusing on the actual issue and trying to dilute the issue by rendering it as violence and riots and using that as a defense mechanism, talk about colonialism, to kind of, hush it, and just kind of not have people look at it and kind of using a different narrative. What gave me hope was that I saw a lot of young people on street from all different walks of life, whether it's white or brown or black. That gives me hope. What gives me hope is my son and his friends coming from all different possible communities, race, religion, ethnicity, asking questions and not being afraid of asking those questions and challenging those assumptions as to why should it be? So I may have had imposter syndrome when I was new in the US in multiple ways, as a migrant, as an immigrant, as a person of color. He doesn't have an imposter syndrome. He doesn't feel like why he should be anything less. To me, it's scary to me sometimes, because I'm as a mom, I'm trying to protect him and I'm trying to tell him to not say certain things in certain situations. And then he grows up and he's an incoming freshman in high school and he's been exposed to a lot of different things. But the person who loves to see transformation in me is also enjoying the fact that these kids are asking certain questions which were almost like the norm and were the unsaid assumptions that's how things are supposed to be. Keep it low when there are cops around because you might be profiled. Don't do this, don't do that. It's kind of like, why? When they can do it, why can't I do it? Those kind of questions. The other thing
about you, the generations that came before, each moved that needle. You did too, and that's why your son did it. So when we acknowledge, we also have to acknowledge that everybody who came before helped.
Absolutely, it was built on their shoulder. We totally cannot be. Yes, I mean, we had MLK with "I Have a Dream." I mean, that's still today. That makes people think that they can do it, right? And so little changes that have been happening, whether it's the media, whether it's the superhero movies. So we had the Black Panther and we had the Shang-Chi now. So you're talking about superheroes come in all shapes and forms. They don't have to look like a certain person in a certain color. It doesn't have to be gender specific. It doesn't have to be race specific. So they're doing their little part. I had we were having this social gathering with 2 or 3 other families, and they were watching, which is this new Disney movie that has come. Is it Cinderella? Recently that's come, and Cinderella is not the typical, blonde hair, and she doesn't look exactly like the one that we read in the books. And so these people were like, oh, this is so not Cinderella. I'm like, but why not? Like, what do you mean she's not blonde? She doesn't look like Cinderella. I'm like, who is Cinderella? That's just a character in a story. You can give her any shape and any form and any attributes. It's what she's doing that matters, right? So those little movements that are happening, and also in the industry, Black Lives Matter has been there for a while, but it's only this last year that I saw many CEOs coming out in open and making statements, which they weren't doing earlier, even though for some of them, it's more, maybe it is lip service, maybe it's about being politically correct. If you look at their boards and their managerial positions, you still don't see that same, their money doesn't meet their mouth. Having said that, the fact that they're actually openly doing the lip service, which they were so scared of doing earlier, definitely moved the needle a little bit, that they can, and they're endorsing it so openly that, it's not right. It can't happen.
And we also know that if you say it out of your mouth, your own soul hears you. So when they say that they support, equality and stuff, and they support making their workplaces better, they think they better know that we're holding them to it.
Yes, and they had meetings with their group, with their company, all the employees. They had forums with other stock management boards of other companies. There was a lot written about all of those kind of things. PepsiCo came up with a lot of work in that area, a lot of initiatives. They've talked about how they will move their Black representation from 14% to 30% by 2025, many other things. So at least there's been something that's been talked about. They're putting themselves out there and making statements that they were worried about, oh, our consumer come from that group or this group, and we don't want to be saying it out loud. At least they're doing that. So to me, that moved the needle a little bit, very incremental, but a little bit. So that gives me some hope as well.
And then Jamila's showing me a question. So the question says, to Dr. Perkins, it says, since your organization does research, where is analytics role in IDAS? So the inclusion, diversity, equity, access, and social justice. As an analyst, I find it difficult to balance between the principles of ideas and using numbers to prove systems. What is already happening? So that's again what we're doing in the lab, is we're taking these constructs like colonization, anti-Black racism, and anti-Blackness, which we're finding it is equivalent. It's less about the color of skin and more about the treatment of humans, right? And we're looking at empathy and self-awareness and community and collaboration and a lot of the ideas and ideologies that have been going on, some of them upholding these systems worse. We're looking at the EDIA, or however people want to fix the initials, and seeing how that's exactly what we're working on now, is how to measure that. And keeping in mind, we're bringing in all methodologies, because we understand that making sure that science looks colonized is part of the problem. So we have to decolonize it. So we're looking at it again, like I said, from that 360 perspective from all sides. And we're listening to Native stories and elders. We're looking at indigenous practices, like I mentioned, Ho'oponopono and Ubuntu and Sawubona and all these different other world belief systems and other world approaches. And we're looking at civilizations that in time across history have figured it out and have figured out how to get along and survive. And then remember, when colonization became worldwide, they wiped out all that. They destroyed the artifacts, they destroyed any documentation, they burned libraries. So they tried to get rid of that information. We're trying to recover it. So to answer that, Jamila, I think that would be, we want to take it in, and we also want to have a lot of weigh in, and it's going to be less about the colonized thing of trying to come up with a new idea and be right or lead scholarship in that, and more about finding ways to collaborate and work together to get some answers so we can all start living a meaningful, healed life and not be trying to compete with each other. And because there's just more than enough, and I sometimes people think I'm a pessimist, but I actually am really an optimist. I just know that we can't be such optimists that we literally don't see the garbage we're walking in, right? So we have to do a balance of both. But life is short. The average life, 60 years, maybe 60, 70 years. And that's not a whole lot of time. So everyone deserves a rich, full life.
Thank you. If I could add to that, I totally agree with having multiple lenses to look at the problem and not the more dominant quantitative sort of collecting data, and having more ethnographic, more qualitative, more lived experiences, the rich, thick descriptions of what people are experiencing, that kind of makes you really look at the information and make informed decisions and interpret what's going on much better. And I totally understand that. I know Zen had asked this question earlier as well, the data analytics piece, looking at the big data. I think to me, data can be misinterpreted in so many ways. It's the questions that you're asking, the data that you're looking at. During COVID, you could look at the same data and paint an amazing picture, and look at the same data and paint a picture that's so grim. So you know that you're walking on the trash that Dr. Vernita is talking about, versus you could totally make the trash disappear and show exactly what you want to show. So the storytelling piece, by really looking at the data and connecting the pieces and get that story across, gets to be the challenge for the analyst, and that piece to me is, we have a master's of science and business analytics program, and I'm the team science, data, storytelling person there to help them understand their responsibility, because you need to convey what's going on behind those numbers. And it's their job to do it ethically, to provide the complete picture and not the selective data. And I don't know if that answers your question, but that's
I agree. So, and I think it's also that because there might be some fear there of, are we just going to regurgitate the same lies again? We also look at the fact that a lot of corporations and their marketing go to our science now, and like you said, they fudge the numbers to show most people are happy in their jobs and all these kind of things. And we know in the world of work and democratizing work that is not the case, right? And so we always look at the origin, who started the study, what was their intention, what was their motivation behind it, who's funding it, and you know, in science, often you have to, you know, indicate who funded you, but we go a little bit deeper to find out who the funders are and what their motivations are and what these people are trying to do. Are they trying to just get tenure? Are they trying to get in a journal? Are they trying to become a famous scientist? Are they selling a book? Or do they actually really care that other human beings live full lives? And so, and that's a very selfless thing to do. And we even are willing to spend money and time and effort to get that done. So there's no, you know, there's no agenda. And so we look for that same kind of intention, right? And that willingness to really find answers. And like you said, I think in the beginning, because we're coming out of this colonial quagmire, I think we're going to see that information is going to take a time to evolve, right? Because it's going to be challenging to do studies of people who are still colonized in our thinking and in our behavior, right? Like you said, we're still upholding things that we don't agree with. So then how do you do a study? So we know too that study participants, it's also, you know, that can be skewed as well. So I think that's, and I think a willingness, like I think as humans on the planet, we have to decide what kind of world we want to live in. And, you know, and like you said, Dr. Preeti, it can't just be good for those guys over there or these 6 people or for me or for you. It has to be good for everyone. And as people on this planet, we have done amazing things as humans. We are more than capable. We have more than enough brilliance and innovation to figure this out. We just have to want to.
I couldn't agree more. I absolutely couldn't agree more. And the other thing in the context of data that becomes challenging is something we have kind of alluded to in our discussion, the intersectionality piece. So one person has so many layers of diversity. So you could be talking about a Black male, Black female, white male. You bring in age, you bring in LGBTQ elements, you bring in so many others. So there are groups that are marked and that are kind of multiply stigmatized to the extent that they become invisible. Because so if your data doesn't bring in all those pieces of their aspects of their diversity, then you're not looking at the full picture. Then you're not telling the complete story of what their experiences are. So that piece is also the key piece there, you know. And if we are looking at data and we're trying to make numbers speak, we at least need to make sure that we have the complete data to be able to have the numbers speak and ask the right questions. You know, I mean, many times people end up using measuring instruments that they're saying, for instance, I'll give you one example. I was teaching my students, they were talking about, they're doing a research and they were wanting to measure teamwork, how good the teamwork piece was. And then they didn't get the significant results. And given what their group was, I was so sure that they'll get it because it made sense given what the intervention was. So I was asking, and then finally they showed me the measure because I kept asking them to share the measure. The measure had questions on, do you like working in teams? Do you like your teammates? Do you enjoy team? And then something of that sort. So then I had to sit down and talk to them and saying, listen, you're saying that you're measuring how good they are at teamwork. Liking teams, liking their teammate is not the same as at being adept at teamwork. So I may completely not like or enjoy being in teams, but I have the skills to be successful in being an effective team player. So what is it that you're measuring? Liking teams or being effective at being a team player? You know, and so if we don't have the right measure in place, we're totally measuring something else. And unless your audience asks those questions and look at your study in depth, they won't even know the questions you asked to measure what you're saying is teamwork, because that clearly is not, right? So
not everybody works in teams. Some people need to work alone. So yeah, so like you said, it's the intersection of all those different layers. You're never, you know, so, and we have to qualify each of the answers. And you know, colonization also looks at like the sum. So they'll say, well, that's why the majority minority thing, like they say, well, if the majority of us think X, then that's how we're all going to live. It's like, no, diversity means that we all adjust and move and bend and balance and change and transform accordingly, right? And that we create all these spaces where everybody gets to be actualized. So again, not everybody works in teams. Not everybody gets to work from home. Not everybody, you know, has to work, you know, a 9 to 5 or 40-hour week. Some people work for a month and then they don't work for 2 months. So again, in the world of work, which is what I'm excited about this global forum these few days, is to really say all the different ways that work looks like. And it is mind-boggling, isn't it? It's so exciting. And how we can support that and how we can create, you know, how we can bring the science and what we know about humans and how we live to creating that. And I think equity, diversity, inclusion, access, social justice, all of those elements will come, you know, will be a huge marker in keeping the balance and making it a healing space and making, you know, democratizing and decolonizing and humanizing work an amazing thing. And I mean, I wish I could live another, you know, 500 years to see if we stick around that long to see what we do with work and how when people look back, like we look back on ancient times, that they will have a deeper understanding of what we did here. So, and I'm grateful to be here today. I'm so glad, Jamila, that you invited us. I really appreciate it. I'm so glad to have this chance to talk, you know, and I wish this forum actually allowed us a roundtable, but this was amazing.
Thank you, Jamila. I know we are past the time. We still can't hear you. Sorry. But I think what's good is that we have, you know, how the Global Forum's objective are so aligned with what we talk about in DEI. We have to look at employees and workers as human being first and not as one of the resources for the organizations. You know, it's the commodification of employees. Yes. That led, you know, that had a lot to do with slavery.
Well, and then that's why we had to go back to what Zin was saying about you know, about really, you know, like we get to humanizing it and we get to live, like hear everybody's lived experiences. And for the people who say, well, work should not be about you, who you are. And I say, absolutely. Otherwise, it is slavery. It is indentured servitude. But when you bring yourself to work and work appreciates you for who you are, that's when the richness really happens, right? That's when it really, and we're not talking about the socializing and social capital. We're talking about humans really expressing. So thank you again. I really appreciate this. Thank you, Jamila. Thank you, Alexander, also.
Yeah, thanks. Really interesting conversation. We get one more request in the question or in the Q&A section. Just, I think it's really a small request, but maybe it's a good point for the end.
Oh, right. The websites. Yes, I'm going to do that right now in the chat. Absolutely. Okay. Sorry about that. Yeah.
I think we're a bit over time already, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know if you have like one last statement or if you want to wrap it up now. It's really up to you.
Good. I just want to thank everyone for showing up and thanks to the Global Forum for democratizing work and to Jamila for inviting me and for everyone for having this. And thank you, Alexander, for your diligent support. Appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone. Yep, absolutely. I'm so glad to be here and having this conversation. And thank you, Dr. Vernita. I think it was a very touching and very moving conversations. And like I said, like you said, we all have to do our part, and we all have to do it to move the needle in whatever little way we all can. So thank you for being here. Just the very fact that you are here, you are interested in moving that needle, or you are already contributing to moving that needle. So that's helpful. And thank you, Jamila, for getting us all together. I know we've been talking about access issues and you were struggling with having the internet access and all the other stuff. But thank you for being there and, you know, kind of not giving up on us and being at it. Are there any other questions?
Again, mine is just thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Yeah, I guess everybody has to go to other sessions as well. We are definitely past our time. Thanks, guys. Good seeing you all.